Good evening, and thank you for joining the Bipartisan Policy Center for this webinar on the future of cryptocurrency and blockchain. We have a small audience here in the room, but we have a mighty audience online. So thank you all for joining us. I'm Michelle Nellenbach, BPC's Vice President of Strategic Initiatives, and I'm honored to welcome you to what promises to be an engaging and enjoyable evening. Cryptocurrency has emerged as a new and rapidly expanding frontier for currency exchange. Today's conversation will be quite topical, featuring three subject matter experts and focused on the opportunities and challenges of Bitcoin and blockchain, including what current crypto market volatility means for the future and the role of regulation and the federal government in these issues. I am thrilled to be joined by my colleague today, Steve Scully, our Senior Vice President for Communications and the host of Sirius XM POTUS channels, The Briefing with Steve Scully, who will be moderating tonight's discussion. Steve, I'll hand it over to you for some brief opening thoughts and introduction of our three panelists.
Michelle, thank you. And we have a great panel here with Rick Edelman, his best-selling book, which is book number what, Rick?
11.
The Truth About Crypto. Tori Newmeyer from National Business Journal and Joe Light, senior writer for, National Business Reporter for the Washington Post, Tori, I apologize, and Joe Light from Barron's. I thought what I would do is begin with some definitions to really level the playing field. And in your book, Rick, you talk about horseless carriage in cars, crypto, and Bitcoin. So explain.
The underlying technology is blockchain, which is the basis for allowing crypto broadly to exist. That's kind of like a catch-all phrase. Bitcoin was the first digital asset invented using blockchain technology, and it was originally intended to be a currency, a replacement for government-issued money. That experiment failed because the one thing you need out of currency is stability. I need to know that my dollar is a dollar and always a dollar. Bitcoin is anything but that. It is known for incredible price volatility, and that doesn't make it work as a currency. But what it has demonstrated an ability to be is a store of value. The way we treat stocks and real estate and bonds and gold, those prices fluctuate too, but investors are willing to hold it long term because they expect and anticipate the price to ultimately be rising more than it's falling. That has been Bitcoin's experience. So whether or not you're going to use it as money, meaning to buy something with, use it as a payment mechanism, is something some people do with crypto, including Bitcoin. But increasingly, more and more people are using it as a way to hold value, a way to diversify a portfolio, a way to invest. And so you have those two competing camps as to what is it really and why should I own it?
So explain, if you could, as you report on this for the Washington Post, the idea of the merge. This is viewed as an upgrade from what we've seen. What is it? Why is it different? And how does it work?
So Rick was just talking about Bitcoin, which remains the world's most popular cryptocurrency. The second most popular is Ether, which runs on the Ethereum network. It's a separate blockchain. And it formerly, until this week, ran on a blockchain that had as its consensus mechanism to verify the transactions on the network. It worked through a system called proof of work. It's very energy intensive, and that's the major knock on proof of work, is that it's asking computers distributed throughout the network to solve really complicated math problems to verify transactions. All of that computing power consumes an enormous amount of electricity, so it's regarded as wasteful by environmentally minded people. Ethereum worked that way, and over the last couple of years, they have run a parallel blockchain that had a different consensus mechanism on it that's known as proof of stake. It requires a tiny fraction of the electricity that proof of work consumes, and they've been testing this on this kind of what had been a kind of dummy blockchain and making sure that it functioned properly. This week they merged, hence why we're calling it the merge. And now Ethereum is working on this proof of stake consensus mechanism that is much more energy efficient. It's got some other implications with it that make this kind of controversial and interesting for the future of Ethereum, but it is a big moment for the second most popular crypto.
When he says much more energy efficient. Let's make sure we really understand how much more. It's 99.98% less energy intensive. So this is why there's so much excitement that a lot of the institutional investors and corporate adoption has been light because of the criticism. There's a big focus on ESG, on environmental and social and governance investing approaches, and there's been a lot of criticism that these things are just energy hogs. And how do you justify that in today's economy and today's socially aware scenario? This made that argument go away. That objection has literally disappeared. And many are hopeful that this means you're going to start to see much greater engagement by institutional investors and the Fortune 500. And if that occurs, you should expect to see a significant increase in the price. So that's the optimistic viewpoint for why the merge is so exciting. We'll have to wait and see if that all proves true.
I want to come back to that in a minute, but Joe, you talk about the investment. You made a lot if you invested early. It's come down. Will it come back up? Explain the rapid rise.
Yeah, well, to say that it's come down, it's kind of an understatement. I mean, since November, the cryptocurrency market has lost 2/3 of its value. It's lost $2 trillion worth of market cap, which and now it sits at about $1 trillion. So investors who got in very early, and very early in this context, means
10 years ago.
It could mean like 10 years ago, exactly.
It could also be 2018.
Yeah, so Bitcoin started in 2009, and there really wasn't a way to trade it easily as U.S. investor until like 2012. So early is actually pretty recent history, but the vast majority of people who got excited about it in the November time period have lost their shirts, and the people especially who invested in the more speculative cryptocurrencies, so not Bitcoin, not Ether, but all of these thousands upon thousands of cryptos that were seen as ways to get rich. They've lost all of their money, and that's even putting aside. So we're just talking about cryptocurrency values. The industry as a whole, some of the companies that provided the infrastructure to allow people to trade and custody and sometimes lend their cryptocurrencies have recently suffered major bankruptcies and have tens of billions of dollars worth of customers' cryptocurrencies tied up in proceedings where it's very unclear whether those average retail investors are going to get any of their money back. So I would say, the cryptocurrency market's come down, but has been, for a certain subset of investors, it's been absolutely, cataclysmic. You had people investing way too much of their personal wealth in something that they didn't realize was as speculative and shaky as it really is.
But many people had to see that the bubble was going to burst.
Well, yeah. I mean, publications like Barron's. Yes. I mean, as in any bubble, you had, you saw this with the tech bubble in the 2000s. This wasn't something that was completely unexpected. It's something that a certain subset of the financial press and regulators were warning about for months and months and months, and that's part of the problem. They warn about it for months and months and months, and things keep going up and up and up. To the point where people lost a sense of skepticism that they should have had. And even among regulators, I mean, Celsius Network, which is a major crypto lending firm that's in one of these bankruptcies, and at one point had $20 billion worth of customers' cryptocurrencies, I reported, and others reported, that they were being, and eventually state regulators announced that they were being looked at for basically selling unregistered securities to investors and not disclosing all the risks involved. And they warned about that, and months and months went by. People didn't flee from Celsius Network, at least not until the last minute. So despite all those warnings kind of being clear, people let their optimism for making a lot of money kind of lead them astray.
There's nothing unusual about this. We see these kinds of manias in the stock market and the real estate market and the bond market and the gold market. If you are going after something with a get-rich-quick mentality and you're believing what you're seeing on the internet without understanding the source, investing in something you don't understand, well, you frankly deserve what happens to you, whether you get rich or whether you go broke. And it's sad to see that so many ignored the warnings and so many were engaging in behaviors that were not healthy for them economically. But it's not unique to crypto. We've seen this over and over again. We're going to see it again in the next thing. And unfortunately, people tend not to learn from the past. And that's one of the big sad side stories of the crypto environment. The bottom line, though, is that the technological innovation that this represents is massively revolutionary. It's going to affect commerce on a global scale over the next decade and beyond, and represents huge opportunities for those who are approaching this with a mature perspective, with the right approach, and are not getting overly enthusiastic and letting their sense of greed overtake their sense of reason.
Can I just add a note
Absolutely.
there? So for customers of Celsius and Voyager, which are the two crypto platforms, the lending platforms that collapsed in spectacular fashion over the course of this summer as the market downturn bit, their executives were telling people, their own customers, in the weeks before they froze their accounts and then eventually declared bankruptcy, nothing to see here, everything's great, your deposits are safe. In Voyager's case, they were actually implying, as the FDIC has pointed out, in a false and misleading way, that customer accounts were backed by federal insurance when they were not at all. So, there's, and these are facts that are being investigated by state securities regulators who are now trying to kind of comb through the wreckage and figure out where the accountability lies. But
And a criminal arrest warrant is now underway in South Korea for the founder of Luna. So yeah, this was ridiculously bad behavior.
But I just pointing that out because certainly the ethos has been, buyer beware. There are no real, regulators on the beat here. This remains the Wild West, but there are those cases, and these two in particular, where retail investors got hurt, not just necessarily because they had dollar signs in their eyes because these platforms were offering them huge returns that they couldn't get elsewhere, but also because they were being reassured in materially false ways by the executives of these companies.
Hence, Warren Buffett said, invest in what you know, and obviously Bitcoin was the big unknown. We're going to get to your questions as well, so keep that in mind, and questions online. When did you first hear the term Bitcoin?
I'm late to this. So, I mean, I think I heard it in 2013 or 2014 when I was in Silicon Valley on a reporting trip for my previous publication, Fortune, and I saw it on a register in a coffee shop that they were accepting Bitcoin to pay for coffee, and it was probably, I don't know what the price was then, but it was, a couple Bitcoin or something to pay for a coffee.
It was a few $100s back then.
And you were thinking what?
Honestly, I didn't know what it was, and I was actually out there to interview Rand Paul, and Rand Paul was one of the first people in Washington to get kind of hip to it, and he had actually asked the FEC for an opinion about whether he could accept Bitcoin as a campaign contribution, and he got an opinion from the FEC that cleared him to do that. And he was very excited about its potential as a kind of libertarian alternative to fiat, and that was about as far as I understood it back then.
Two other terms, if you can explain, and Joe, I'll turn to you: blockchain and tornado cash.
Yeah. So the blockchain is sort of the internal mechanism by which Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies record each transaction that happens on the chain. So whenever you have, so the way Bitcoin works is, as Tori already explained, you have all these computers trying to quickly guess the answers to cryptographic puzzles, and if they do that, they win the right to add another transaction to Bitcoin's an immutable blockchain, and basically record that this transaction, the sending of Bitcoin has happened, and so you have this record, and you're preventing the problem of somebody being able to spend their Bitcoin twice. So that's basically what the blockchain is. It's public; anyone can see it. If you have the right tools, you can see every transaction that's ever been made, on the Bitcoin network. Now, and because of that, the Justice Department and other enforcement agencies, if they're able to identify the actual person behind the pseudonymous identifier that it identifies somebody on the Bitcoin blockchain, they can very easily see all of the money that that person has sent and track any criminal activity, in a snap. Tornado Cash, to solve that so-called problem, a problem for criminals, Tornado Cash created a service that basically allowed anybody, criminals or otherwise, some people say they just want to do this for privacy reasons, to anonymize their transactions. Send it into into a big pool of money that all kind of gets mixed together in a tornado, if you will. And then gets sent out so that law enforcement agencies and others, would have a much more difficult time tracking the origin and the origin of that money. And so, obviously the agencies that are in charge of tracking illicit finance, don't like that idea at all. And so, just a few weeks ago, we had one of the first sanctions of computer code, I think is how a lot of crypto supporters would put it, where Americans are technically not allowed to engage with Tornado Cash and any wallets or services that have engaged with Tornado Cash, which has become like this huge. There are lawsuits around it now. It's become this huge hubbub among the crypto community who claims, no, this isn't just an illicit finance tool. This is a tool to maintain people's privacy when they're transacting with money, which they see as a fundamental right.
One other term that I want to talk about, regulations or lack thereof, NFTs, these non-fungible tokens. Explain that. Anyone?
I don't know if I'm the NFT authority. I could take a crack at it, but I'm looking at Rick.
All right, let me give it a shot. To understand a non-fungible token, you first have to understand what a fungible token is. A token is just a representation of something. A rose is a token of my affection. Mm-hmm. We use a subway token to take a ride. So a token is a representation of something. A token on the subway is a ticket to ride. A fungible token is a token which is the same as every other token. Think about dollars. If I loan you $1 and you repay me in a week, you'll give me back $1, but you don't have to give me back the same dollar because every dollar is the same. They're all fungible. $1 is $1 is $1. If I loan you my car, you better give me back my same car because my car is unique. Even if it's a Ford Mustang, it's different from every other Ford Mustang. So, because it has more dents. So a non-fungible token is a token that is unique. So think about a Picasso. Each Picasso is unique. He only painted one of each painting. So that is non-fungible. It's unique. So a non-fungible token is a digital file that is different from any other digital file. In the beginning, this was extrapolated in the form of artwork. There was an artist who goes by the name of Beeple who sold a piece of digital art at auction at Christie's for $69 million. And you, of course, ask yourself, why on earth would anybody spend $69 million to buy a piece of art that they look at on their phone that doesn't exist in the real world? And that has exploded into a wide variety of commerce as well as artwork. You have what are called the Bored Apes Yacht Club, which are tens of thousands of digital images, each of them unique, that people feel have value and that they're buying and selling and trading the way they do baseball cards. And in fact, the NBA has created what they call Top Shots, which are a series of digital cards, similar to baseball cards we used to trade as kids, that are video files, really, digital files that contain a lot more info than a typical cardboard piece of paper used to for baseball. And the NBA has sold hundreds of thousands of these cards for tens of millions of dollars to people all around the world. And it's growing leaps and bounds in the utility of these. The notion of the art angle, some people are saying this is just a fad. It can't be sustained. Who on earth is going to... Everyone who wants to buy one of these already has. There's really no one left who is interested in buying these things. And we've seen prices, in fact, crash over the last several months, along with the rest of crypto. But what we're beginning to recognize is that the underlying technology of these NFTs is really rather fascinating. We can tokenize anything. We can create a digital token of any real physical asset. So we can create a digital token that represents a Picasso. We can take a digital token that represents your driver's license, your passport, your medical records, your employment records, your academic records. We can tokenize the deed to your house, which then would allow you to fractionalize it, carve it up into 1 million pieces, and sell each piece for $1. So you don't have to worry about owning an illiquid asset in retirement. You can monetize it and sell it in the marketplace. You'll be able to monetize your salaries. We're already beginning to see the music industry do this. Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, Stevie Nicks have all sold. Pink Floyd just did it 2 weeks ago, sold their music catalogs. You're going to see the companies that have bought the music catalog sell those songs as NFTs. So every time you hear Blood on the Tracks, you'll be able to own that and earn a royalty from it. You'll be able to have concert tickets sold as NFTs. Hotels are now selling hotel rooms as NFTs so that they get a guaranteed income stream. You now own the right to that hotel room on a certain night. And if you can't go, you can resell that hotel room instead of losing your reservation. So if you want to take a gamble on where the 2028 Olympics are going to be held, you could go buy the hotel rooms of every hotel room in that city, hoping that they'll be picked for the Olympics, and then you can resell those hotel rooms in the future. We can monetize, democratize, and tokenize every asset in the world. And that's what NFTs are all about and why it's the new big thing in the world of crypto.
And that's just taking a crack at it. That was pretty damn good. So, Tori, let's talk about Washington and regulation, because you probably saw the Facebook hearing a few months ago, and safe to say that there are a number of senators who were clueless when it came to technology. And I'm wondering where we are with crypto, who are the key players, and is Washington lagging when it comes to any regulations that's needed with Bitcoin?
Yes. As far as your last question, there is no federal architecture right now around how to treat these things and where they fit into our existing laws. And so the big debate that's happening in terms of regulation is, should the SEC or the CFTC really take the lead as the prime regulator for this space? The SEC and the CFTC are both angling for jurisdiction. It's more power, frankly, and prestige, and there are a lot of opportunities here. And if you view this as the next big thing, and then the committees of jurisdiction for those agencies on the Hill are aligning themselves accordingly. So you see senators on the banking committee eager to establish the SEC as the primary regulator, so they get their piece of it. Senate Agriculture Committee, which oversees the CFTC, is eager to establish the CFTC. And there are other regulators in the mix too who want various pieces of this. But for a year plus, this debate has been fully joined in Washington, and there's just been a lot of kind of finger pointing and elbowing and gesturing, but without any kind of resolution or clarity about where this is going.
But this is really exciting because you're absolutely right. In the last year, we're starting to see this jockeying. That is a huge leap forward from where crypto had been until now. Previously, the open question was, will the government ban it? Will they prohibit it? Now the question is, how are they going to regulate it, not whether they will. And the fact that there is widespread acknowledgement that this is here to stay, that the government isn't going to prevent it, they are instead going to try to control it for the sake of consumer protection and economic stability, while fostering and supporting the development of the innovation itself, is a huge leap forward that is really relatively recent in the last year or so. So we are going to see over the next couple of years the clarity. The turf wars will get ironed out, the bills will emerge in Congress, we will see legislation and regulation. I'm guessing it's going to take a couple of years, but we're going to get there. At this point, everyone's in agreement we have to get there because they're not able to stop it.
I think it's worth noting that on the Hill, at least, at the moment, the industry is clearly winning this argument about not just their right to exist and there being a future here, but how they want the rules to be written and who they want writing the rules. And the easy way to kind of reduce this and understand how fast the industry has come is to understand that a year ago in August, there was a tax reporting requirement added at the last minute to the Senate infrastructure bill that the crypto industry assessed would be enormously disruptive and was badly written, poorly conceived as far as how it would impact the entire crypto ecosystem. And they pulled out all the stops that they could muster at that point to try to get this fixed in the bill. They lost. This bill became law with this provision intact. Now they're trying to fix it as the rules get written. But you fast forward a year, and there are a number of bipartisan bills in both chambers right now that establish the CFTC as the industry's primary regulator, fix the problem that was enshrined in that bill, and do other things to advantage the industry's treatment by regulators. So, they went from losing and getting caught flat-footed to a position a year later when, in the time since, have invested enormous amount of money and energy in building up a lobbying presence in Washington, hiring former regulators, former staffers, establishing themselves as a force on the campaign trail, spending tens of millions of dollars investing in candidates that they think are friendly or might be friendly. So they have arrived really in sort of fast forward as a major force shaping the rules that are yet to be written. But I think the proof is in the legislation, the proposed legislation that's out there right now, that they are making their voice heard.
But Joe, this is a simplistic question, but what are they regulating? What agency would regulate Bitcoin? And who are the key players? Who are you following on the Hill?
So yeah, that's a big question. Yeah, so first with Bitcoin specifically, almost everybody, including on the Hill, including at the agencies, even some of the agencies that the crypto industry considers to be antagonists, such as Gary Gensler, views Bitcoin as a commodity, and as a commodity that would fall under the jurisdiction of the CFTC. And that's sort of where the sort of like universal agreement ends. And in particular, it's true that Congress has the most powerful tools to determine how crypto will be regulated. But until then, we're sort of stuck with the laws that are on the books. And in particular, at the SEC, Chair Gensler is of the view, and he just reiterated this today, that the vast majority of cryptocurrencies are securities that fall under his jurisdiction. And what that means is, although they haven't brought many cases yet, yeah, they will, and he said repeatedly that they will, is that they might end up suing token issuers for issuing crypto tokens without registering with the SEC. They could go after trading platforms such as Coinbase and FTX and Binance for allowing the trade of security tokens on their platforms without registering their platforms with the SEC. And so Gensler, verbally, if not like through actual enforcement actions yet, is really setting up a situation where we could see, before Congress is able to get its act together on legislation, lots of enforcement actions that have a huge impact on the crypto industry and could start to make legislation that tries to move everything into the jurisdiction of the CFTC more difficult. If you have Coinbase registering with the SEC, is Congress really going to pass a law that takes that away and then hands it to the CFTC? So on the Hill, the most active legislation to watch that does something big is in the Senate Agriculture Committee by Senators Stabenow and Bozeman, who had that committee, and they have a bipartisan bill to put Bitcoin and Ether, the two largest cryptocurrencies, under the jurisdiction of the CFTC. Now, they don't resolve like all the questions over what is a security and what is a commodity. And part of the reason is tactical, because if they tried to do that, that would mean they'd have to start engaging with those senators on the banking committee, and it makes the whole process much more complicated. So they have something going on. And then Senators Lummis and Gillibrand earlier this summer released an even kind of more sweeping bill that does try to address many of those questions. But so far, anyway, that one doesn't seem to be on the fast track. I think in the near term, clearly the Agriculture Committee wants to at least have some sort of vote to move their legislation forward. As soon as this year, it's going to be really difficult with the election and everything to get a vote in the Senate and to get a corresponding vote in the House and have it actually become law. So maybe this all just sets it up for 2023. But I mean, there are other bills too that address more specific areas like stablecoins. But I would say those two bills are kind of the most sweeping bills to watch right now.
So, Tori, how contentious or how bipartisan is this on the Hill?
It's largely bipartisan. All of the bills, the bill that Joe just mentioned is bipartisan. The ag bill that Stabenow and Bozeman are pushing, it's a Democrat and Republican who are the top members on the ag committee. And then the other big sort of sweeping proposal in the Senate right now is from Senators Lummis and Gillibrand. That's another bipartisan duo. And there are some companion bills that are also bipartisan. So we haven't really talked about crypto skeptics or critics on the Hill. They exist. They're overwhelmingly Democrats, and I think they are overwhelmingly in the Senate. And you think about Sherrod Brown, who's the chairman of the Banking Committee, and Elizabeth Warren, also on the Banking Committee, and has a national profile besides, who I think are probably the most outspoken critics of the industry. And they think, while there is a progressive case that the industry likes to make for its potential to democratize finance and promote financial inclusion and disrupt the chokehold that traditional financial institutions have over this segment of the economy, these senators and some others in their camp don't buy it. They say this is basically an elaborate Ponzi scheme and a speculative bubble that's already on its way to bursting, and the most vulnerable populations who got excited about the potential for getting rich quick are going to be the ones ultimately left holding the bag.
You brought up K Street. I want to come back to that in just a moment. But Rick, Jerome Powell, who's a former senior fellow here, he went on to take a bigger job at the Federal Reserve. He has talked about the idea in general terms of the U.S. creating its own cryptocurrency. If that were to happen, how would that work? And is that even likely?
It's a done deal from what I hear from the folks at the Fed. How it'll work is uncertain. Even whether it'll be blockchain based is uncertain. I believe that it's likely that it will be, but that's not yet a done deal. And it's going to happen before the end of the decade, so it could happen as early as 2025, although I think that's too optimistic. The reason that it's virtually guaranteed is that this is not just a US thing, this is global. Every government on the planet is investigating, developing, deploying, researching CBDCs. Many have already deployed. China has, Russia is close, Sweden has. They launch theirs next year. The Bahamas have, typically smaller countries who need it for a variety of reasons. But it's definitely the future. I mean, think about it. We have digitized every aspect of commerce on the planet. When's the last time you spent cash to buy something? Our airline tickets and hotel rooms and our car rentals. We use auto pay for our home and our utility bills and our mortgage payment, our car payment. And yet the federal government still prints cash. The amount of money that they spend to print, distribute, store that cash is ridiculous. It's dirty. It doesn't last very long. It really doesn't serve an effective purpose. We should convert dollars into digital dollars because it simply has too much benefit from doing this. The IRS loves the idea because it's a wonderful way to thwart tax evasion. The Department of Defense loves it because it's a wonderful way to thwart terrorism financing. The Justice Department loves it because it's a great way to catch criminals and drug cartels. So this is a wonderful advantage, and everybody acknowledges this. So there's not a question of whether we're going to do it. It's only a question of how. How will it operate? What will be the underlying technology? How can we make sure it's not disruptive to the economic stability of our nation? along the way. There's some very serious questions. But the Fed has now hired the first ever chief innovation officer, Sunena Tuteja, who was the crypto executive at TD Ameritrade. So they are very clearly serious about this, working with their colleagues at BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, which is the country club of central banks around the world. They're all working on this. And there's no question that they're going to do it. How they're going to do it is yet to be resolved. And one key point that fits along the lines of what Tori was saying about Elizabeth Warren, there are many who believe, and I suspect they're probably right, that the Fed can't do it without congressional approval.
That was my next question, yeah.
And so they're going to have to sell this to those such as Senator Warren, who, although she has said publicly it's time for a CBDC. She's not real happy about the rest of crypto, but she has said publicly it's time for that. And that's because everybody realizes that if the Chinese succeed in permeating their digital currency around the globe, there is a threat to our national security, to humanitarian goals and democratic nations on a global scale. So there's a lot going on behind all of this, but I am fully convinced that CBDCs are in our future.
Is it all right if I disagree with almost all of that?
Please do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still very much an open question whether and how quickly the Fed will move to issuing a CBDC. I mean, you've seen. So Lael Brainerd at the Fed, she's been a very big proponent of issuing CBDC, but you've seen many other Fed governors and former Fed governors express skepticism that a CBDC actually solves some sort of, a tangible problem. And on the other hand, as Rick pointed out, there are severe consequences were the U.S. to issue a CBDC, and then it got, it was screwed up somehow. And actually, a lot of the opposition to CBDC is coming from Republicans on the Hill, who see stablecoins, which are basically privately issued digital tokens that have reserves and are supposed to maintain a value of $1, as already kind of achieving, many of the benefits that a CBDC could theoretically achieve. And on the China question, I mean, it's true that other countries, and especially China, are way ahead of us in developing a CBDC. China's already tested its digital yuan at the Olympics. They've given it to citizens, and it has it can do tricks, they can make it so that your digital yuan disappears in 90 days. So that it's a way you could do stimulus. Make sure people actually spend the money in time. But there's also obviously a lot of surveillance embedded in a digital yuan, and so I think the idea that a digital yuan or really any foreign CBDC is going to threat the U.S.'s dollar dominance, or anything like that. The reason the dollar's dominant is because the U.S. has deep capital markets, open capital markets. It has nothing to do with the form of its banknotes. That's not the reason that the dollar is so dominant. And so I think that ultimately, even though I'm sure that the Fed, the Boston Fed already has a big research program going on to develop the technology behind a CBDC, they're going to continue doing this work to make sure that we're ready. Should Congress decide to pull the trigger in issuing a digital dollar. I think it's going to take a long time. 2025, I mean, I would be shocked, but technology moves fast. But I would be, I think it's going to take a really long time to get there.
But as you know, Tori, Senator Warren is no big fan of the Fed chair. So does that complicate anything that Jerome Powell is trying to do on this? And just to go to Rick's point about what Congress will do if there is a U.S. cryptocurrency.
I think it's going to be a fascinating debate that in a lot of ways kind of inverts people's natural inclinations on the Hill for reasons that Joe just described. I mean, there are going to be libertarian inclined members on the right who say everything about why this is attractive to the Chinese shouldn't compel us to try to match them, but should brace us and make us wary of handing our government control over a programmable money that we can monitor and control and used as a surveillance tool. I mean, there's a healthy end the Fed, audit the Fed contingent that remains on the right on the Hill, and I think the last thing they're going to want to do is authorize the Fed to replace fiat with a kind of centrally controlled money that gives the federal government and the Federal Reserve total kind of panopticon surveillance power over how all of our money is moving around. That's why the Chinese like this. And so, and then there are progressives who are going to say, for if the government is, if there's another pandemic or we need to hand out money very quickly, this is maybe a good option. We can set this up very quickly. We can land it in people's bank accounts, and we don't have to go through the kind of jerry-rigged thing that the Treasury Department did in the first rounds of stimulus when the pandemic hit. So
You don't even need bank accounts. Technically, you just need a smartphone.
right. So I mean, I just
Which is one reason why the Fed is very wary. Like what happens if everybody keeps their digital dollars in a wallet instead of a bank? What does that do to credit access in the U.S.? Because banks rely on those deposits, to help fund, mortgages and the rest of the,
And this
the
is why
rest
the
of the financial
American Bankers
system.
Association hates the idea. But this is the flip side of people saying, well, it's only the establishment that hates the idea, and we might as well have listened closely to the horse and buggy manufacturers who
Right.
oppose the Model T.
Yeah. I mean, one place where I feel like the U.S. leadership will be important is because all of these other countries are moving ahead so quickly with their CBDCs. Like all of these countries, apart from a couple notable exceptions, want to be integrated with the U.S. financial system, and they want to develop a CBDC that will ultimately jibe with the standards that the U.S. ends up setting for like sanctions compliance and those sorts of things. Nobody wants to have to be shut out of the correspondent banking system and subject to Treasury sanctions and those sorts of things. So even if the U.S. takes a very long time to come out with its own CBDC, I could see them coming out with some set of standards. Don't become a panopticon or whatever to make sure that countries don't do something that we ultimately disagree with.
It's all on your phone, except if you're Lindsey Graham, he still has a flip phone. So there you go. I want to go back, though, to the issue of what's happening just a block from here on K Street. A lot of money involved in trying to influence Congress. You brought up the lobbying effort. Just take that one step further. What is happening? Who are the key players in the lobbying industry, and who's trying to move the needle?
Well, there's a kind of an alphabet soup that kind of grew up overnight in the space of trade associations that are trying to capture as much money as they can from all of the players and convince people in the industry that they need to be investing here. And I think what was so powerful about that moment that we talked about last August in the infrastructure bill was it was so galvanizing for so many people in the industry to understand. And I think waves of tech prior to crypto have gone through this kind of rude awakening where they feel like they are disruptors, and Washington is where good ideas go to die, and they don't care about it and they don't want to deal with it, and that is and they're kind of allowed to go on that way until they get to a certain size and reach a certain level of success and start throwing off enough money that Washington takes an interest in them, and they understand, well, we may not like Washington, we may not want to deal with Washington, but Washington wants to deal with us, and so we need to be there. And in the last year, the industry has established, has thrown a lot of money, and it's been kind of chaotic because this effort has come together very, very quickly, and people are still, I think, sorting themselves out downtown, but there is a tremendous amount of money being thrown at the building some lobbying muscle. And then I think even maybe more powerfully, some of these newly minted crypto billionaires who are now getting into the campaign finance game. And clearly in that realm, the kind of biggest power that's come out of nowhere here is FTX. This is a trading exchange that was founded by a guy who's now only 30 years old, Sam Bankman-Fried, is worth many, many billions of dollars, and happens to be very interested in Washington. And he has spent, I think, close to $40 million already this cycle. He has said he could spend many, many multiples of that in 2024. And I think he is being kind of thought about fairly as his generation's George Soros. I mean, an absolutely, game-changing kind of presence and he's got interest beyond crypto, but he's also interested in crypto, and he's got a real agenda here. And I think everybody knows who he is now and on the Hill, and they've either tried to get money from him or are wary of him and his political operation entering their races. And so, I mean, I think it's hard to overstate the power that brings with it. So, and Sam Bankman-Fried, I just want to say, Sam Bankman-Fried and other executives at FTX are responsible through the first half of this year for 97% of the money, was the calculation I did through July, of the campaign finance money that crypto executives have distributed. So, I mean, it's an overwhelming proportion that has come from these guys, but it's also tens of millions of dollars.
And worth, I think, did you say maybe $20 billion?
At Bitcoin's peak, he was worth about 30 billion. So he's worth less today, but what's a few billion among friends?
A couple of questions. This is from one of our viewers. Thank you for watching. And Joe, I'll pose it to you, asking to explain stablecoins and what the Fed may be doing to regulate stablecoins.
Sure. So there are two major kinds of stablecoins. The most popular are backed by reserves, and so there's one called USD Coin, which is issued by Coinbase and Circle, and there's one called Tether, which are by far the two largest. That, along with one issued by Binance, those three are by far the largest stablecoins. They're meant to, unlike Bitcoin, which is very volatile, stablecoins are meant to maintain a stable value, typically of $1, and they do that by holding dollar-backed assets, bank deposits, treasury bills. In some cases, in riskier assets like commercial paper, those sorts of things, and they maintain the stable value of $1 by allowing some of their users to go to them at any time and exchange, one stable coin for $1, that's sent to their bank account. So in that way, they maintain parity. The other major kind, which has had a lot more problems, are algorithmic stablecoins. And I'll try to explain this. I mean, it sounds crazy, so don't blame me. Algorithmic stablecoins try to maintain a stable value of $1 by an arbitrage mechanism where they always allow traders to exchange another cryptocurrency, one that's doesn't have any reserves, not tied to any asset, at a set rate for one of the so-called stablecoins. And so the way this falls apart is it obviously relies on the fact that second cryptocurrency, the non-stablecoin cryptocurrency, always maintains some value. So what happened in May that was responsible for some of the crypto winter that we're in now and all these bankruptcies is an algorithmic stablecoin called Terra USD broke its peg. The cryptocurrency that was tied to, called Luna, began to lose a lot of value. Investors lost faith that this arbitrage mechanism was going to survive, and both currencies entered a death spiral where
In only a matter of hours.
hours, days. But I mean, at the end of the day, as a stable coin that was worth billions of dollars was worth millionths of a cent, and it never came back, and it caused a lot of other investors and services that were using Terra USD to themselves collapse. So algorithmic stablecoins, they've led to a whole lot of problems.
They put a real black mark on the industry. I warned against them in my book, and people used to ask me, was I surprised that they collapsed? And I was surprised it took so long to collapse. I mean, it really was nonsensical that you would have one coin's value stabilized by another coin, which is inherently unstable. I mean, it just didn't make a lot of sense. A very different approach from USD, which, in theory, if you have, for every dollar of digital coin, it's backed by a US dollar or a US treasury, that seems to make sense. The question is whether they're actually operating that way. And so, as Tori mentioned, there's a lack of transparency. There is these companies which are sometimes outright lying as to what they're doing. And so you really have to wonder, can you trust these coins at this stage, given this regulatory environment or lack of. And so it's, yeah, it's you called it the Wild West. I think some would say it's really more like Lewis and Clark.
We clearly selected the right people for this panel, so you have been very impressive. Question from the audience. Go ahead.
Thank you. This question is for Rick on NFTs, and thank you for explaining them in a way that I finally understand. You mentioned tokenizing passports and driver's licenses, and for someone like me who is naive on the terminology and just everything around NFTs, it just sounds ripe for fraud. So I was wondering, recognizing that regulation is often reactionary, how can the industry get ahead of that and create a proactive solution for counterfeit and fraud?
Well, the industry is using blockchain technology as a defense against fraud. For example, salmon fisheries in Norway, Breitling, one of the luxury watch manufacturers in Switzerland, Parmigiano Reggiano, one of the luxury cheese makers in Europe, are all using blockchain technology to mark their products so that you as the buyer can track the delivery of the salmon, the distribution of the watch, the retail sale of the cheese, to know that this is a legitimate product, because forgery and counterfeiting is such a huge problem in every industry on a global basis. So the technology fundamentally can help very much to protect against this. What you can't really protect against is that if you have a fake driver's license and you digitize it, well, it's fruit from the tree. So it's a real problem. Think about it right now with our vaccination cards. I think we've all taken that vaccination card, which has been amazing to me that it was something that they just handed out and we filled it in ourselves. Yeah. I mean, my driver's license is more secure than that card. And what did I do with the card? I photographed it, right? And it's now digitized on my phone. So I created an NFT of my vaccination card. And I can distribute that card however I wish. How does the recipient know that the data on the card isn't fraudulent? And we know that there are fake vaccination cards for sale on the internet for people who don't want to be vaccinated but who do want to get into buildings that require a vax card. So how can this be prevented? I don't think this is a blockchain conversation or a crypto conversation. This is a fraud conversation. And it's what keeps the Secret Service busy with counterfeit money. This is just going to be something else for us to have to worry about.
Next question, go ahead.
So, keeping in mind the recent Ethereum merger that you were just talking about and how they've moved now to a less energy intensive form of creating, chains and whatnot. Do you think that the government, especially looking towards net zero for like 2050 and all of these climate goals that we have as a country, do you think the government has an imperative to regulate crypto with a mind towards, climate consciousness and making sure that not only are we using, less energy intensive production methods, but also that energy being used is coming from renewable sources, et cetera?
Tori?
I think it's a very good question. There is a lobbying campaign right now by environmental groups and an executive who's bankrolling it from a competing crypto protocol to try to force Bitcoin off of its proof of work mechanism. And I think it's doomed because there's a culture around Bitcoin that's fiercely protective of its history and its methods, and they think the security of the blockchain is bound up in ways that are inextricable with the proof of work concept. And because it's also so distributed, getting the kind of consensus required to switch from proof of work to proof of stake for Bitcoin, I think is basically impossible to do. But that's happening. Whether there's a role for authorities to kind of mandate that, I'm skeptical of that. Maybe there are regulations that governments at certain levels can impose on miners. These are the people who validate these transactions and that are consuming all of this energy. Maybe that's a more reasonable way to do it, but
I I'm glad you mentioned government at many levels. New York, for example, has recently put a stop to Bitcoin miners. They're not licensing anymore because of the energy concern. So New York has shut the door. Texas has wide opened the door, along with Arizona and Wyoming, Florida, Illinois, Oklahoma has a bill. So the states we haven't really paid a lot of attention to in this conversation, but there are 50 of them who also have to be paid attention to in terms of their state regulation and legislation that they're likely to be developing. So I share Tori's view. I think you're right that you're going to find some argue that they can foster their climate change efforts in the world of crypto. From the crypto's perspective, the community reaction I find fascinating. They are working hard to convince everyone that they're the good guys in this energy debate, that the number one expense that most businesses have is HR, it's payroll, but in the crypto field, the biggest expense is energy. So they have more motivation than any other industry to lower their energy costs. And they've created the Crypto Climate Accord, modeled on the Paris Climate Accord. And they argue that 65% of their energy is green already, and that they're moving as fast as they can toward innovations and applications that make the CO2 problem go away, so that even Bitcoin, with its energy use, will be green. We can debate how much of that is just positioning as opposed to a legitimate point, but it's a huge conversation that's not going to go away given what's going on in the world with the energy crisis.
It's worth noting quickly that last week the White House did release a report on crypto mining that detailed all of these emissions problems and suggested, new standards be put in place to limit them. And it did float the possibility, although it would probably require Congress, of banning proof of work mining, what Bitcoin uses to maintain the digital ledger. I don't think things will ever, really go that far, but it's definitely a conversation that the government's having.
I buried the lead. I want to get one more question here and give you the last word. But do we like the term crypto? You didn't like it, right?
I hate the term crypto. It's a scary phrase. When I hear crypto, I think cryptography, which is scary, or I hear crypt, which means death. So I don't like crypto. And that's why I really was unhappy with my publisher when they were arguing. But it's what everyone calls it. So you got to call the book The Truth. I wanted to call the book The Truth About Blockchain and Digital Assets. And they were like, no, we're going to call it The Truth About Crypto. And so the opening pages of my book talk about the fact that we really shouldn't be calling it crypto, even though it's the title of my book.
Hey, thanks for the talk. Really interesting. So I just have a thought about, we're treating, and I specifically want to focus on Bitcoin and Ether, which are sort of viewed nowadays as more of a commodity or an asset. But we've also talked about, creating a U.S. government as a cryptocurrency, and there's this sort of dichotomy between, do we treat crypto as an asset or do we treat it as a currency? Because there's sort of, in one aspect, you want it to be volatile so you can have these gains, but if it's a currency, we would want it to be stable. So should the federal government regulation, as they open up these talks, where is this heading? Is Bitcoin and Ether going to just be an asset that they're going to be regulating, or do you think they want to focus it on seeing the technology produce itself as a currency?
Rick?
I view it as dollars versus stocks. They peacefully coexist. They have vastly different function, and one doesn't eliminate or usurp the other. So I think crypto is yet another asset class that has unique and different attributes as well as detriments, just like every other asset class, whether it's stocks, bonds, real estate, precious metals, natural resources, you name it. Here along comes digital assets, the first new asset class in 150 years. So I don't think that they are mutually exclusive. I think you can create a digital dollar. Stable coins already exist, so they can serve that functionality of price stability. Whether or not they are ready for prime time use, whether they're ready for everybody to be using as an alternative to dollars or checkbooks or Venmo or PayPal, not yet. Will they be? Maybe. There's so much we don't know yet. There's so much that is evolving on a rapid basis. The only thing I'm convinced of is that all of this is going to stay, It's going to become bigger than it is today. It will become ubiquitous in the future. And the sooner we all learn about it and understand it, the sooner we'll be able to make decisions for ourselves and our families as to how best we want to engage, so that we are not left behind, but we're also not risking our personal finances unnecessarily. The biggest thing that bothers me is that people are investing without understanding what they're investing in. The average investor who owns Bitcoin is unable to explain what it is. And that is simply the wrong approach. So it all begins in every asset class, in every investment strategy. It all begins with knowledge, education, understanding, awareness, and that's where we need to begin. This is huge. It's the biggest technological innovation since the invention of the internet, and we need to make sure we understand what this is all about.
So I'm going to give each of you a minute to think about the final question. And Joe, I'm going to begin with you as a reporter covering this for Barron's. Where is this story going from your standpoint? As somebody, Tori, who is covering the regulations, and you touched on this earlier, what are the questions you have moving forward? And then Rick, I'll give you the last word, which is where are we now and where will we be in 2032? So Joe, let me begin with you. As a reporter covering this, where is this story going to lead?
I think for the next 6 months is all going to be about regulation and legislation. We had the market story, which is sort of the crypto crash that happened over the summer, and now we're going to have the fallout. Where we have bills, live bills on the table, which could pass as soon as this year, although maybe it gets pushed to next year. We have an agency and SEC Chair Gary Gensler, who has already said many times that he's going to be bringing enforcement actions against some of these gigantic companies for breaching the law. And so if we had this conversation again in January, I would be shocked if one of those shoes hasn't dropped and kind of subsumed the crypto story.
The lobbying effort, the Federal Reserve, the congressional debate. What's next?
All of it. And I agree with Joe that I think clearly the ball has moved from the market story to what's happening in Washington, and I'm not just saying that because it privileges my my take on all this stuff. But I do want to say I think the reason why investors and anyone who's curious about this space should care a little bit about where this ends up as far as the SEC versus the CFTC, which is kind of like maybe the threshold question as far as most of the asset class goes and how it gets treated in Washington. It can seem very academic, eyes glaze over kind of material. What an advocate of stricter financial regulation would say about this, the stakes are the SEC has an investor protection mandate. They have decades of experience putting that into force and a lot of tools that allow them to do it. They've got, real-time market monitoring tools and a lot of other rules that they've developed over decades to help them do this. And they also have a capacity that the CFTC doesn't have. They have 6 times the budget. They have 6 times the number of people over there. Whereas the CFTC doesn't have any of that. They don't regulate spot markets right now. And I do think that's why the industry is very invested in, it's not just about the personalities that happen to be atop these 2 agencies right now, although clearly the CFTC chair is friendlier towards the industry than Gary Gensler is. I think there's an accurate view among industry players that they will get a seat at the table writing the rules that will govern them if the ball gets handed to the CFTC. And I don't have a guess as to when this is going to get resolved, when the legislation is going to get passed, or these lines of authority are going to get sorted out. But I do think that's the major question. And then obviously what the industry does here to continue to build its presence, I think continues to be a fascinating story.
Rick, you sold how many copies?
It's 10,000 or so, according to my publisher.
So if you read the book, when I ask this question, you know what I'm talking about. My grandmother called them galoshes, just for the record. Where are we at this moment? You talked about the internet. we are on the cusp of some significant changes. And fast forward to 2032, where will we be?
Much further along, for sure. This is moving at the speed of technology and technological innovation. So we know that this is going to be a digital economy on a global basis in the future. McKinsey says that by the end of the decade, 70% of the GDP will be digital-based economy. We are recognizing that everybody is talking about this in similar light. PwC says that blockchain technology is going to grow 10x over the next 4 years, that there's going to be major advances. That we talked about NFTs being the current big thing right now. The next big thing is the metaverse, which is still in its infancy. And the gateway into the metaverse are NFTs. So we'll be living our lives there economically, socially. We will be engaging in NFTs as a way to conduct business, to engage in relationships in that fashion. And a lot of this tech hasn't yet been developed. The rules aren't yet in place. And it's all going to be developed over the coming decade. So there's no question in my mind that your ownership of digital assets is inevitable. You're simply going to choose which digital assets, how much of them you're going to own, and when you're going to choose to buy them. You're either going to do it now at a relatively high rate of speculation, or you're going to wait into the future where it'll be much more routine. It's the same as when you opened your very first email account. Did you do it with AOL when it was startup and a dial-up modem? Or did you wait until a year ago and you got the latest and greatest on the newest smartphone available? Mm-hmm. It's your choice when you want to participate and how you'll participate, but it is inevitable that you will.
Joe Light from Barron's, thank you very much. Rick Edelman, your new best-selling book. Have you written 10, 12 books? How many?
Number 11.
Number 11, The Truth About Crypto, and Tori Neumeyer from the Washington Post. To all of you for being with us, and to our audience on the web, thank you very much. Appreciate your expertise. Please come back again. On behalf of the Bipartisan Policy Center, we thank you.
Thank you.